Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Humans Are Sneaky Bastards, written by firefighter Raven. Pragrin looked over his datapad while he waited by the holographic communication sphere to be ready to give his report to the Thrazan High Command. He once again inspected his uniform to make sure that he was within regulations. As the communication sphere flickered to life, he snapped to attention and saluted the Supreme Commander, the 5 Grand Admirals, and the 5 Grand Strategos of the army seated around the table. Inquisitor Pragrin, Senior Intelligence Officer, ran Sector Command, reporting as ordered, doing his best not to show how nervous he was presenting a report before the High Command of the Thrazan Empire.
"Be seated, Inquisitor,"
rumbled the voice of the Supreme Commander over the holographic sphere's audio device. "Yes, sir," Pragrin replied, taking a seat in front of the sphere. The Supreme Commander said,
"We called this meeting to discuss an intel report sent by you and flagged high priority. There are some on the Council that doubt the veracity of this report."
Grand Admiral Yelpin spoke up. "Do not take this as a slight in your abilities, Inquisitor Pragrin, but the High Command needs to clarify this report. We do not think it possible for humans to field the numbers that you reported." The Grand Admiral continued,
"If these numbers are accurate, then it will require shifting a significant portion of the fleets and army units."
The Supreme Commander spoke up again.
"We have also had reports of buildup in the Terek system, but much smaller than the one in your report. Explain how this intel was gathered and give an updated report of the human activity in the Samact system."
"I hear and obey, Supreme Commander," Pragrin replied. For the past 3 parlax, we'd begun to pick up a decrease in the usual communications and ship traffic into systems. We ran diagnostics on our equipment and found no issues. Pragrin began. It might not sound like much, but the source of the missing signals caught our attention. Pragrin paused to bring up an image in the holosphere before continuing. "This is a graph showing the sources of the signals we monitor. If you look at the last source, it's a radiation signature given off by the reactors on the civilian mining outpost. We use that signature as a baseline for the radiation output and natural signals given off by the system star and orbiting bodies," Pragrin explained. "If we seem to get a spike that indicates increased activities by the humans, we can check against the baseline to see if the signals are just being magnified by stellar or background activity." Pragrin pointed to the time frame that coincided with 3 parlax ago. "The radiation signatures spike and then begin to fade until they are gone. Checking against the other part of the baseline showed no stellar activity to cause that." Grand Strategos Tickless asked, "Couldn't they have just shut down the reactors or had an accident?" Pragrin brought up another image. "Humans' energy sources are far inferior to our own and give off more signatures than our own. This graph shows the shutdown of reactors in the Icalarian system just prior to our invasion. They were trying to evacuate all of their assets before we arrived. As I said, their energy sources are inferior to ours and take 5 times the amount of time to shut down." Pragrin brought up another graph. "This shows the signature of a reactor we destroyed when we invaded the Niag system. There was a massive burst of radiation at the moment of destruction. Neither of those shows up in our monitoring of the Samact system." Pragrin points to the spike of radiation signatures. "These match previous readings of new reactors being brought online. Either the humans made a massive technological jump to improve their reactors, or they were masking the signal somehow. It was only for a few rotations before we noticed some of our intelligence assets, both living beings and electronics, started going dark. This was enough to pique our curiosity, and we sent some of our cloaked reconnaissance probes to the system. We thought it was lost because we weren't getting any signals back, and sent another one. So we sent a third, but gave orders to return after 1 rotation of the planet the humans occupied. After the probe left the system, we started getting information back. The other 2 probes were still active, but unable to transmit out of the system. Humans have found a way to block all artificial signals from leaving the system. Even our communications between our probes were restricted inside the system. That also explains our assets going dark. But we didn't know why they did this. So we sent the probe back to get close enough to change the orders of the other 2 probes to leave the system at preset times and transmit their data. Pragren changed the image to one of the smacked systems, and the probe locations were marked. We snuck one of the probes close enough to begin receiving information from our assets on the station. The next intel dump is when we received reports of the increased human activity and new construction on several habitable moons. It also provided the initial intel on the gathering fleet. At first, it was only a dozen warships, 3 capitals, and their support ships. But dozens were arriving over each parlak. One of my remaining assets on the station also reported large numbers of ground forces arriving and then being flown to one of the new bases. So far, it has counted the insignia of no less than 8 divisions, to use the human term. Previous intelligence reports have listed a human division to be 25,000 soldiers. Pragren switched to a new screen. We received another probe signal before this meeting with updated information. We estimate the human fleet to be over 1,500 warships and several hundred other types of ships, mostly troop transports. Over 500 are capital ships. Pragren checked his pad again before continuing. We've counted 5 supercarriers, 100 standard carriers, 200 battleship class, and 200 of their heavy cruisers. The rest of the fleet is a mix of subcapitals that the humans classify as light cruisers, frigates, destroyers, and corvettes. Our current estimate has 1 supercarrier containing 500 strike craft, and carriers carry up to 150. The best estimates is 17,500 strike aircraft, but we do not know how many are for space combat, and if any are assigned for planetary support of ground forces. The asset also updated human ground force numbers. 3 more divisions have arrived. 1 artillery, 1 of armored vehicles, and 1 mech. We do not know their actual strength. Current total number of ground forces is at least 200,000 troops. The members of the High Council looked alarmed. The Supreme Commander asked,
"Do you have any idea of their target?"
We picked up an increased reconnaissance activity in the Bulun system, Pragren replied. He continued, our assets also picked up bits and pieces of information to support that system.
The Bulun system makes no sense. It has no strategic value,
one of the Grand Strategos exclaimed. He was a recent addition to the High Council, and Pragren had forgotten his name. Before Pragren could reply, Grand Admiral Pullen answered,
not by itself, but it makes a good stepping-off point to other systems that would make effective staging grounds to then hit 7 significant worlds, both military and industrial.
At this revelation, most of the members of the High Command looked either concerned or alarmed.
"And what about the Derrick system buildup?"
the Supreme Commander asked. After consulting with the intel staff monitoring the Derrick system, we believe it's a distraction to keep our forces in that area. Discussions with my superiors came to the same result, Pragren replied.
And why does the intelligence come to this conclusion?
Grand Admiral Pullen asked. Pragren changed the image in the globe to show scans of the Derrick system. The naval and army forces are much smaller, maybe 150 ships of all types near the 4th planet starbase. That includes troop transports. Pragren continued. Their attempts at preventing our reconnaissance of the system is not as good as it's been in the past. We think they want us to see them. They are dangling a force dangerous enough to take the Jakrant system, but not against the forces we have in the system and our fleets and armies in the area. But the human force building up in the Smacked system outnumbers our total force in that sector 4 times over. Pragren finished. Pragren waited quietly as the High Command deliberated. Supreme Commander addressed Pragren.
"Normally, someone of your security level wouldn't be informed of these plans ahead of time, but we've determined this situation requires immediate updates on the intel. So you, and only you, will report directly to us, not through your superiors first." We are going to transfer the 1st, 3rd, and 8th fleets from the Grant system and the Carty systems to the Semact system. The 2 more fleets will come from a more secure sector on the Empire. The 5th and the 6th army groups in the Grant system will be relocated as well.
Admiral Upellan spoke up. We'll be taking an indirect route to avoid detection. Besides monitoring the human buildup and notifying us when the offensive commences, you are here to also look for any signs of detection of these movements. The next few rotations were a busy time for Ipragran, updating the latest intel on the human buildup and ensuring the movement of the Thrazan forces wasn't detected. After discussions with High Command about the human forces attacking the Jakrant system, it was determined to be part of their misdirection ploy. Therefore, no reinforcements were sent there. Even after the Jakrant system fell, even the destruction of the 5th Fleet along with the army guarding it, the High Command still waited and fortified the Semact system. And then one rotation, the forces in the Semact system just vanished. All the humans and assets were gone and the system was empty. It was also rigged to explode after Thrazan forces entered the station. 2 ships and 383 ground troops were killed. All other human structures exploded right after that. The High Command assumed that the humans discovered the forces waiting for them and withdrew entirely to avoid the Thrazan forces' counterattack. Ipragran was promoted for his actions during that period. They congratulated him for helping prevent the human offensive from succeeding with his work. It was 3 revolutions that Thrazan Prime later that Ipragran was captured by the humans when the Renek sector fell. As a high-value prisoner, he was taken to the human homeworld for imprisonment and frequent interrogation. He assumed humans used tactics to interrogate as brutal as Thrazan interrogators did. After minimal resistance, he began freely answering their questions. It was after they had gone over all his communications with Thrazan High Command over his career that he decided to risk asking the question that had bothered him since the humans abandoned the Semact system. "May I ask a question, Colonel Adams?" Ipragran requested.
"You may,"
the Colonel replied. "Thank you, 4 of what you call years ago, your invasion forces in the Semact system just disappeared within a matter of days."
The Colonel replied, "Yes, I remember that."
"Where did they go? We never saw some of the divisions our spy reported in action after that, and we didn't come across a build-up in space areas that matched the number of ships," Ipragran asked.
The Colonel looked at his comrade. "Not like he's going to escape and tell his buddies, right?"
The Lieutenant Colonel replied, "No. I think it's safe to tell him, and we've been dying to brag about it to people outside the know." The Colonel returned his attention to Ipragran.
With a grin, Colonel Adams began, "They never existed, or at least most of them."
Ipragran was confused and asked, "What do you mean?" The Lieutenant Colonel spoke up. "We took a page from the major conflict on Earth before we ever put a human in space," he continued. "They used deception to pin down enemy forces at the wrong location and keep from defending against a true invasion force. They even thought that the true invasion was a feint, just like you did." Ipragran was horrified. "But I saw the images of all the ships myself, and my assets saw the unit patches."
Colonel Adams laughed again before speaking. "These ships were either empty hulls with only some having engines, so you would see them arrive. Others were disguised civilian ships that also brought in disassembled parts to build more fake warships."
"And the troops?" Ipragran asked. The Lieutenant Colonel replied, "Oh, that's only a couple of companies of non-combat personnel. We knew about your spy, and the Yakiri have always been horrible at telling humans they don't know apart. It was just the same 300 troops changing uniforms or division patches and boarding the station again. The actual unit never had any patches or identifying marks. We were just designated the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops after the original unit that handled the deception."
"Feck,
"I was fooled by you," Ipragran replied. "My entire career was built on a lie, and I never figured it out."
Colonel Adams replied, "It's probably better that you didn't, or they might have imprisoned you."
Looking miserable, Ipragran replied, "I would have probably been executed." With that revelation, he was suddenly very glad that he never found out, and that he was a prisoner of the humans if High Command ever did find out. Looking at the 2 humans, "You humans are sneaking bastards," Ipragran accused.
At the same time, they both said thank you, as if it was a compliment. End of story. I would like to thank our T5 members and patrons, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Vidmori, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.